So this is chapter 10.
So now we're on chapter 10, project resource management.
How many chapters are there? 15?
Well, there are actually 13 major chapters, in other words, taking us through stakeholders. But yeah, I think let's see, where's my copy of the pen box? But there are, there's a couple of chapters at the end. So there,
It says 15. I think it says 15. Let's see.
Well, there's the appendices.
Let's see what that says. I'm just looking.
So it depends on how you count everything, because
Oh, okay.
13 is the really last chapter, and the references aren't important, but as I said, the glossary of terms is very important. So you definitely want to look at those. But now we're going to project resource management, and this used to be human resource management, but then they took into the consideration you might just be dealing with resources. So, which kind of covers the waterfront better than human resources. So at any rate, so we're going to talk a little bit about project resource management, which is chapter 9 in the PMBOK. So okay. We're going to define it. We're going to differentiate again between the functional and the project manager. We're going to talk about the processes. We're going to identify the stages of team formation, which is important. And then we're going to explain organizational theories and leadership styles. And again, these are some that you should know for the test. Again, project resource management includes the processes to identify, acquire, and manage the resources needed for the successful completion of the project. So the team is composed of people with assigned roles and responsibilities. The physical resources are any tools, equipment, or property necessary for the project. And the team resources include people, employees, and contractors working together to manage the project effort. So let's talk a little bit more about the functional versus the project manager. The functional manager, again, handles a business area like human resources, engineering, research and development, etc. And so they are subject matter experts in their area of expertise. It could be procurements. And in a functionally defined organization, the roles and responsibilities are well defined for a functional manager, and they own the resources and assign the specific individuals on the project team.
Okay, now, so they own, so technically in a typical business, you're saying they own the resources.
Correct. And the project manager is accountable for the specific project and its quality. So project managers are not necessarily technical experts, and the organization structure defines the degree of authority of a project manager. So remember, we had our spectrum where completely functional is on the one end and the functional manager is absolutely the king. And then we have projectized on the other end, where the project manager is absolutely the king, or queen in our case. So you have, and then you have the matrixed organizations in the middle, which is the more logical or the more prevalent organization. And the matrixed organizations travel along the spectrum from what PMI would consider weak, where the functional manager is still pretty much in charge, to a strong matrix where the project manager has a lot more control of the staff and the budget and the other resources. So, that's basically how we assess weak, balanced, and strong matrices. If they've got equal call over the resources, then it's balanced.
Well, the balanced, so when it's balanced, both of them have control over the resources. When it's high, the project manager has more control. When it's low, the functional manager has more control.
Right, weak, strong and weak, yeah.
Okay.
So, for instance, on the ISO 9001 certification, you've got people from different departments have to talk to the evaluators. And again, they want to talk about how resources, come and go, how they're released, and what happens once the project is completed. Because, with that continuum of organizational structure, you have the various positives and negatives for the individual employees. Okay, so project resource management, and basically this has 6 processes, and again, they're all, in the planning, executing, monitoring, and controlling area, as most all of these are over here, from here to there, because basically that's what you do. You start with the plan, you execute the plan, and then you look at how the plan has been executed. So if you notice, there's kind of a similarity up here. You do all this planning up at the top here, and then here basically you're controlling what you plan. And so the major differences are within how you execute it. Okay, so we're going to talk about planning resource management, and that is the process of defining how to estimate, acquire, and use team and physical resources. So this is your typical plan. You don't really do a thing so much as you come up with a plan. And hopefully in an organization that's continuously improving, you have a plan template so that you can, drop things in, not have the blank page to stare back at you, and spend less time actually doing this planning, tailoring specifically for your project. But the incoming inputs are the typical project charter, the project management plan, the documents, the EEFs, and the OPAs. So, and again, the project charter probably had some high-level resources that were required for the project, so that you had some idea of what you've got to get. So, do you need to have access to a sand pit because you've got, something that needs sand and gravel rock or what have you? Or do you need access to water because it's a very water-intensive process? Things that are prevalent and overarching in your project are probably resources named in the project charter. So basically the tools and techniques, you're going to use your expert judgment, your data representation, and then you have your organizational theory. And in the next couple slides, we'll talk about how the organizational theory applies to this. And then, of course, you have always meetings. And if this was Project Management 101, somewhere we would talk about having good meetings, because otherwise it looks like PMI is just all about meetings, which they're really not. But often you have to have meetings. And then, go ahead.
Question. Because the plan resource management is, we're identifying, we're estimating, acquiring, managing team and physical resources. In the project resource management, we're identifying, acquiring, and managing resources?
Uh-huh.
Okay. So that's where the difference lies. Okay.
Okay, so, and then the outputs are the resource management plan, again, which follows logically from the name of the process, the team charter, and as I said, we'll talk a little bit more about team dynamics in a minute, and then any project document updates, because you might find that based on the team you have, or what, you find gaps or other things, in the various documents. And so, for instance, the requirements documents. So let's talk a little bit about organization charts and role descriptions. And of course, that needs to be very succinctly defined so that people understand their place in the organization. So, this is a typical top-down organization, very hierarchical. But in theory, all of this PMI work works for any level or depth of hierarchy. So you could have, the big old-timey companies like General Motors that have a very deep, from top to bottom, there's a whole lot of levels of hierarchical structure. Or you could have the very flat, at Facebook, I think there's 2 levels between, the bottom intern and what's his name, Mark Zuckerberg. So again, you need to tell people what their role is, and where they slot into the food chain, so they understand that, say, the development team lead doesn't immediately go to the project manager with a problem, because you have to understand the chain of command. So one way to let people know what their roles and responsibilities are and who to go to is by using the responsibility assignment matrix. And so, again, this can identify project responsibilities among the project team. Now, one kind of responsibility assignment matrix is what they call a RACI chart. So that's for responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. So you see that, you've got 4 people that you're talking about in your project, and you've got the various activities, 8 activities down the side. And so basically, in this chart, everybody has at least one role in all of those things. That is not necessarily the case. Somebody might have no role, or somebody might have more than one role. They might be responsible and accountable. So, this is just one depiction of how a chart could be. But the key takeaway here is there can only be one accountable in each row. So for each of the 8 activities, you have only one A. So you notice there's only one person accountable, because PMI is very much about the buck stops here. This person is particularly in charge. And remember when we did our WBS breakdown and we went down to work packages, but then below work packages, we got into activities, because activities are the one person thing
linked to that.
Okay. Yeah, we don't have the oh, I was waiting on person A, or, I was waiting on person B or something. The buck has to stop. And so just like only one person can be accountable for an activity, PMI wants the buck to stop. And again, in terms of the project manager, it's often with the project manager. Okay, another thing we can look at is the resource histogram. And of course, this is one of the things that Microsoft Project will give you kind of for free. I mean, not for free, but if you load a schedule with all of the resources and things, it'll tell you what the staff hours required for the various things are. And you can see by type whether you have, too many or too few. So maybe if your staffing line is like this, this is really the staff that you have. Say, this might be 10 staff members. So you're good at all the places that are under the curve, but at these places that are above, you've got to figure out, do you try to put some of this work back this way, or do you hire more people, or do you stretch the project out? Because obviously you don't need a lot of that staff here. So again, this, staffing should at worst be a smooth curve, or, and well, for most resources, although wood and sand and non-human resources kind of don't care if you go up and down. But as we'll talk about later, in terms of team building, there are negative aspects to going down on your staffing and then coming back up on your staffing. So again, you've got to have a resource hiring strategy that makes your resource staffing effective. Okay, next we're going to talk about estimating the activity resources, and this is the process of estimating team resources and the type of quantities of material, equipment, and supplies necessary to perform the project work. And so basically we have our typical inputs, and then our tools and techniques. Again, because we're estimating, we want to throw everything at it. So we use our expert judgment, we use some data analysis. Remember, we talked about bottom-up estimating. So just like we took the number of days it would take for each task, we could sum those up to the top to come up with our schedule, or the number of dollars to complete an activity, we can sum those up to create a schedule. We can also take the number of resources necessary to complete an activity and boil those up to the top to say how much you need. Of course, we've got our project management information system, which also needs to capture the use of resources that are non-human. So if you're using a fleet of trucks for pickup or delivery, say you are running in my case, gallery furniture in Houston, because everyone loves gallery furniture in Houston. If you have a fleet of trucks that both, might need to pick up things from your distribution centers and take them to your showrooms, and then also deliver them to the clients, you've got to make sure you have the right number of trucks available, but not too many, because obviously that's expensive to have trucks sitting around doing nothing and truck drivers sitting around doing nothing. But, you know, if your promise is no back order slips, and, you know, if you buy it today, we'll deliver it tonight, then you've got to follow through on that process. So your system has to account for all of that stuff. Again, we might use analogous estimating. So if we built a building before, we would know how much wood and glass and concrete and whatever went into it. Again, we're going to have meetings to discuss how we're estimating our activity resources. And, you know, also we might want to use parametric estimating. So what comes out of the estimate activity resources? Well, the resource requirements. And of course, whenever we come up with some kind of estimate, we want to clearly specify what our basis was for that estimate. So if we say, you know, we're a kind of a box builder and we build Dunkin' Donuts usually. If we build a Starbucks, you know, if Dunkin' Donuts was our estimate, you know, then we have to clearly identify what are the differences in, you know, in addition to what are the similarities. We need a resource breakdown structure. So again, just like we break down our work, we've got to break down our risks. So say we need, I don't know, 1 million linear feet of wood. Well, that's nice to know we need a lot of wood, but, you know, how many 2x4s, how many 4x8s, how much plywood, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then potentially when we're starting to estimate the activity resources, we might update documents like the requirements document and say, oh, you know, we need a little bit more of this because, you know, whatever, 2 people are working on this at the same time and they can't share. So we've got to have an ample supply for both to use.